original members.
No.
But there's something I have to tell you also about Don. Today is his birthday. Shall we? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Don. Happy birthday to you. You may sit down, Don.
The gifts are all back there, Don. Take one as you will.
Finally 21.
What year
Made
were
it.
you born? 36.
Okay, we're going to do a couple of the preliminaries here first. It would not be fitting if I did not thank all of the people that make this stuff happen. Danny Hussey, our IT director, Ozzy, who's standing back there, and Andrew. They all put this together, and also members of our staff, Katie Prishon, who helps me with my slides, Derek, the building manager. You'd think, hey, how can there be so many people doing this? But there is. Just a couple quick program notes. Our next two programs on March 14, we will be doing the Patents Lorraine campaign, and on April 4th, we'll be finishing up with the Battle of Wake Island. If you see me going too far forward, go like that. Today, we're going to honor our Air Force veterans. Any Air Force veterans in the audience? Thank you. Thank you. You automatically get a free book.
Wait, Duane, we got parents of.
Parents of an Air Force.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
Sons of Air Force?
That'll work. Yes. This is what we like. This is what you like. And because you guys were so bad the last time about answering the pop quiz, we're going to do 2 pop quizzes this time. They told me the questions were way too hard. So what we're going to do, we're going to have one moderately difficult one and then one incredibly easy one. Okay. What I want to also point out, these free books that we're doing are going to come from this cart right here and from the generous donation of Dr. Aaron Stevens' estate. And I don't think Ralph's here today, but he is his son, and he made that happen for us. Also, when you're here, as you're going out, if you exit along the side of that wall over there, there's a very interesting map and box art display, and of course the models up there in the display case. I handed out some shells to some of you people. Sorry I didn't have enough of them, but that's going to become relevant in a few minutes. So, all right, I guess we can start. So, I don't see anybody else running down the aisle there. So, we can start. Today we're going to do our program on the raid on the ball bearing plants at Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg. How many of you saw Masters of the Air on Apple TV? Any of you? Okay, good. Now that's good. Okay. All right, this is, I'm going to make sure. August 17th, the entire strength of the American heavy bomber force in England is set out to bomb 2 major industrial complexes deep in southern Germany. We already talked about that a little bit, but the date, August 17th, is important because the year previous, October 17th, 1942, was the very first B-17 bomber raid across the Channel. Now, as Richard will be happy to tell you, the British had already been at war with Germany for 3.5 years. They had a very different bombing technique, different strategy, but something they found out pretty early is daylight bombing did not work. So that is why the British did strategic bombing and pinpointing cities, but they would most always go at night. Now, the 2 areas in Schweinfurt, the ball bearing factory, and a couple of you lucky people will get one. This is what it was all about. And I'll explain to you what this does in a couple minutes. Here's some personalities that we're going to talk about as we go along. General Karl Spaatz of the 8th Air Force, Colonel Curtis LeMay, who you may have heard of. He is going to be the leader of the Regensburg mission. Ira Eaker, who's in charge of the 8th Bomber Command. Hap Arnold, he's over in Washington, and they're breathing down his neck to do something big. And this is that something big. Brigadier General Robert Williams, he will lead the attack on the Schweinfurt factories. Where were the B-24s? Well, all of those B-24s, and we talked about this a couple of years ago, with Operation Tidal Wave. That was one of the other important factors that they wanted to do. They wanted to wipe out the Axis resources to oil. So they were going to attack the oil refineries at the Romanian city of Ploiești. And that was on August 1st, 1943. Those of you who know that story, that they came in at treetop level and took massive casualties. The problem with that is they took off from Africa, and almost immediately when they left, the Germans picked them up on their radar, and they were waiting for them. Okay, this is what it's all about. What does a ball bearing do? Most of you maybe may know that. It is purpose is to reduce friction in mechanical devices and to support the radial axes like that. You see? There we are. And the Schweinfurt plant produced most of the ball bearings, I think something like 40 or 50%. And over 1,300 American airmen would die or be captured trying to cripple this industry. Now what would happen is, of course, they're flying over Germany. They're doing this mission. If they get shot down, one of two things is going to happen. They're going to die or they're going to be captured because they were taken immediately to a prison camp. The other thing is the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg. That was a target. They wanted to cripple the aircraft industry. The Regensburg factory was not in a residential area. There was a very unexpected benefit to this raid on Regensburg, and we will talk about that in a couple of minutes. So, what happened on Decision Day? Decision Day, August 17th, 1943. Brigadier General Frederick Anderson had to decide. And what was happening, Richard? Fog. British fog. He had three options. He could cancel the mission and risk losing as long as 2 weeks the ideal weather conditions that would exist between Holland and Africa. He could send out both forces out into the fog and run the risk of a bunch of mid-air collisions, or he could send the Regensburg force out first and leave the Schweinfurt force to go out later until the fog cleared over the bases. Anderson chose the last option, and in hindsight it would end up being the worst, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Here's a few Germans that are pretty prominent in our story. Adolf Galland, you may know a little bit about him. He flew with 6 different squadrons. He was also one of the first jet pilots, but also he was a thorn in the side of Reich Marshal Goering, because Goering was trying to get them to do different strategies, and Galland, who was in the front lines, was telling them something completely different. Hayo Hermann, he arranged or originated what was called the Wild Sow tactic, which is they would send out the squadron and then it would be every person for themselves and they would attack aggressively. He was also the person that came up with the strategy of the head-on pass. And I have my B-17 I took my B-17 out of the case just for you guys. Now, something you're going to notice, something you're going to notice real quickly is that there's a gun in the front here. This is a B-17G. This came later. The B-17s that those guys were flying had no front-firing machine gun. Therefore, this is what's going to happen. They're going to come straight at them like this, 12 o'clock high like this, 12 o'clock low like this, 12 o'clock level like that. And I'm going to tell you, when we get to a slide that says B-17 stories, I'm going to tell you a couple of those. Heinz Nocke, he wrote a book called I Flew for the Fuhrer, and he had some very interesting things to say. He was shot down 5 times. He received a concussion and many wounds, but he was also very forthright when Reich Marshal Goering came to inspect one of their bases, and I have this written down because I got to write it for you. He says, bulging legs emerge from the scarlet boots of doeskin that he looks kind of sick because he has a bloated, puffy face, and I am forced to come to the conclusion that he uses cosmetics. But one of the other sayings things that he said in his book, it says, we need more planes, more engines, and less headquarters, which is probably quite right. Here's our B-17F, and as I was saying before, you notice that there is no front-firing gun on there. I'm going to take this out of the gun. We're going to take a look at this, and you're going to see the bombardier and the navigator up front, the co-pilot and pilot, the engineer behind who would also operate the top turret, the radio operator, the ball turret gunner, which we'll talk about later, the left and right waist gunner, and of course the tail gunner in behind. And we'll look at a couple of these positions. I got some nice pictures. Here's the pilot and co-pilot and the navigator or bombardier. Here's an interesting picture too. This is the bombardier talking to the navigator. The navigator sits at that table and he has his charts. Here's the reason why I gave you out some shell casings. Look at this. They're sitting in a pile of them right there. This is obviously taken after a successful mission because both of these guys seem pretty happy, and obviously a stage picture. And just a quick note about those shells that I handed out to you. Those shells were not collected off of any battlefield. They weren't collected in Germany. They weren't collected in England. Would you like to know where they were collected? They were collected on our beach, right out here. And the reason for that is, maybe you know this story, maybe you don't. Buckingham Airfield out in Lehigh Acres was a training area for these guys. And there was 2 very famous guys that were in the Army Air Force that trained out there. And this is not a pop quiz, I promise. Charlton Heston and Charles Bronson. They trained out there in Lehigh. And if you see this right here, and you can look at it a little bit later, I was able to come by this sign that says Fort Myers Flexible Gunnery School. And that's where you get Gunnery Boulevard out there. Yeah, and a very nice lady and her son, who had a metal detector, was going up and down the beaches picking those up. And what they would do, a tow plane would fly along the coast towing a target, and another plane would fly and they would practice shooting at it, and all of those shell casings came down on our beach. So that's the story of that. Oh boy. Here is probably the least desired position on any bomber, and that is the ball turret. And I want you to take a look at this guy, okay? Because there's going to be an interesting story coming up when we get to the slide that says B-17 stories, which I will tell you. Here's our tail gunner in the back, and here's a cartoon that came up where the B-17 was known as the Flying Fortress, so you can see it made a picture of a castle there. Anyway, here, I'm sorry that's so small, but there's these are the different bases where the bombers took off. And those of you who are fans of the Masters of the Air, Thorpe Abbott's, that is the base there. that the 100th Bomb Group took off from. We will make some mention of some of these. And if you ever wondered what those numbers or the letters were on the tail of the B-17, it designated which one of those bomb groups the plane belonged to. The D there, that is for the 100th Bomb Group. And of course there were others. And you see this over here, these are the different distances that the supporting aircraft could take. That's going to come into the story as well. Here is the two legs of the mission, one to Schweinfurt and one to Regensburg. The Regensburg flight, of course, here's my chance. My low-tech pointer. The Regensburg force is going to come down this way, hit Regensburg, but they're going to do something different, and the Germans aren't ready for this. They're not going to turn around and go back to England. They're going to bomb Regensburg and then fly south over the Alps, over Italy, and go to North Africa. They called it a shuttle mission. Here's another picture, a little bit better, that shows that. The green is that mission over here to Regensburg and then south to Africa. And here's the Schweinfurt route. They're going to Schweinfurt, but the problem is going to become very evident. These guys are going to turn around and go back to England. One of the mainstays of the German Air Force, of course, was the Me-109. This is the Me-109G. It had an inline Daimler-Benz engine, and like the E version, had very tricky landing gear.